The world's busiest airport is on fire. Smoke is rising over the Burj Al Arab. Drones are slamming into skyscrapers in Dubai Marina. And Kuwait's international airport struck. This is not a war movie. This is March 2026. And the Persian Gulf, the financial nervous system of the global economy, is burning in real time. Here is what actually happened and why it changes everything you thought you knew about power in the 21st century. On February 28th, the United States and Israel launched a coordinated surprise assault on Iran, killing Supreme Leader Ali Khamenei and dismantling key military infrastructure. Tehran answered within hours, not with diplomacy, not with silence, but with Operation True Promise A4, firing missiles and drones across the entire Gulf arc, hitting Bahrain, Kuwait, Qatar, Saudi Arabia, Oman, the UAE, and beyond. Iran didn't just strike back at Israel, it struck the architecture of American power projection across the entire region, targeting Al Udeid Air Base in Qatar, Ali Al Salem Air Base in Kuwait, Al Dhafra Air Base in the UAE, and the U.S. Navy Fifth Fleet headquarters in Bahrain. Every single hub of American military dominance in the Gulf hit, and in the crossfire, the Gulf states, those carefully constructed oases of gleaming towers, tax-free wealth, and manufactured neutrality, discovered that their decades-long strategy of buying security from Washington while quietly accommodating Tehran had just collapsed in a single weekend. As one analyst put it, seeing Manama, Doha, and Dubai bombed is as strange and unimaginable for people there as seeing Charlotte, Seattle, or Miami bombed would be for Americans. The illusion is gone. The era of comfortable neutrality in the Gulf is over. Let's talk about what really happened here, because the Western media is giving you the headline but not the architecture of the moment. On February 28, 2026, the United States and Israel launched what they codenamed Operation Epic Fury and Operation Roaring Lion, a coordinated decapitation strike against Iran, killing Supreme Leader Ali Khamenei and virtually the entire top tier of Iranian military and intelligence leadership in simultaneous strikes on 3 meetings held that same morning. Think about that for a second. They didn't just strike a nuclear facility. They struck the head, the brain, the nervous system of the Islamic Republic in one single morning. The operation killed Khamenei and the country's top military and intelligence leaders, triggering something that Washington apparently believed it could contain. It could not. Iranian forces reacted within hours by launching missiles in an operation it named Operation True Promise I-4, and the quicker response relative to that of the 12-day war suggests a change in Iran's command structure. In other words, Iran didn't need a supreme leader sitting in a bunker to make decisions. The machine had already been programmed. The IRGC, the Islamic Revolutionary Guard Corps, that vast military, economic, and ideological empire within a state, had its own doctrine, its own chain of command, its own will to survive, and it unleashed that will across the entire Gulf in waves. Iranian missiles and drones struck the U.S. Fifth Fleet headquarters in Manama, Bahrain, Kuwait International Airport and Abu Dhabi in the United Arab Emirates, Al Udeid Air Base in Qatar, Ali Al Salem Air Base in Kuwait, Al Dhafra Air Base in the UAE, the Saudi capital of Riyadh, Erbil International Airport and the U.S. Consulate General in Iraqi Kurdistan, residential areas of Dubai, the Burj Al Arab in the UAE, and Al Minhad Air Base in Dubai on the first day alone. This is not a symbolic response. This is a carefully mapped, pre-planned, deeply rehearsed strike matrix that Iran had been preparing for years. Every American military hub in the Gulf region, catalogued, targeted, struck. The Gulf states, those gleaming monuments to neutral wealth and careful hedging, Bahrain, Qatar, the UAE, Kuwait, Saudi Arabia, all of them found themselves inside a war they spent decades and billions of dollars trying to avoid. And here is where the story gets philosophically interesting, because it forces us to ask a question that almost nobody in Washington wants to answer honestly. What exactly did the Gulf states do to deserve being bombed? They said they were neutral. Qatar had been quietly hosting American aircraft at Al Udeid for years. Yes, the largest American air base in the Middle East. But Doha had also maintained diplomatic channels with Tehran, with Hamas, with everyone. The UAE had normalized relations with Israel just a few years earlier in the Abraham Accords. Saudi Arabia was in the middle of its own normalization talks with Riyadh. These were countries that had invested everything in the idea that they could be friends with Washington and not enemies of Tehran at the same time. That bet just failed, catastrophically and publicly, in a single weekend. Iran's Mosaic defense doctrine enables regional commanders to act independently when central command is disrupted. Read that again. Iran built a military doctrine specifically designed for the moment when its leadership would be decapitated. This is not improvisation. This is decades of strategic thinking by people who had watched what happened to Saddam Hussein's Iraq in 2003 and Muammar Gaddafi's Libya in 2011, and concluded that the only way to survive American-Israeli power was to build a war machine that could fight without a head, and it is fighting. Iran and regional allies launched Operation True Promise Dior, conducting 27 waves of missile and drone strikes against US and Israeli military targets. 27 waves. Not one or two symbolic gestures that could be absorbed and managed diplomatically. 27 sustained waves of fire across an entire region. Now let's talk about what this does to the global economy, because every American watching this from their living room needs to understand one thing with absolute clarity: this war is already in your wallet. The conflict disrupted approximately 20% of global oil supplies transiting the Strait of Hormuz, causing prices on the Brent crude oil market to rise from around $70 to over $110 per barrel within days. The oil production of Kuwait, Iraq, Saudi Arabia, and the United Arab Emirates collectively dropped by a reported 6.7 million barrels per day by March 10th. 6.7 million barrels per day. Gone. Vanished from global markets in the span of days. Oil prices topped $100 a barrel for the first time since 2022, when they spiked in the aftermath of Russia's full-scale invasion of Ukraine. And analysts are not ruling out something far worse. A commander in Iran's Revolutionary Guard Corps said that the strait was closed and that any vessel attempting to pass through the waterway would be set ablaze. At least 5 tankers have been damaged, 2 personnel killed, and about 150 ships stranded around the strait, which separates Iran and Oman. Think about what the Strait of Hormuz actually represents. It is a narrow neck of water between Iran and Oman, roughly 21 miles wide at its narrowest point, and through that neck flows roughly 1/5 of all the oil consumed on this planet every single day. Around a quarter of global seaborne oil passes through the Strait of Hormuz, along with roughly 1/5 of liquefied natural gas shipments. And Qatar produces around 40% of the world's helium, which is used in the production of semiconductors. The region also supplies significant portions of global ammonia and nitrogen, the building blocks of synthetic fertilizers that feed billions of people. This is not just an oil story. This is a food story, a semiconductor story, a global supply chain story. Global oil prices have surged by more than 25% since the start of the war, driving up fuel prices for consumers worldwide. The national average petrol price reached $3.41 per gallon on Saturday, rising by 0.43 over the past week, and that number will keep moving. Airspace closures in the United Arab Emirates, Qatar, Kuwait, and other Gulf states led to over 4,000 daily flight cancellations, stranding hundreds of thousands of passengers. Emirates Airlines, one of the most powerful carriers in the world, suspended operations. Qatar Airways, gone. Kuwait Airways, grounded. The air travel architecture of the entire region, the infrastructure that connects Asia to Europe, to Africa, to the Americas, partially collapsed in a matter of hours. International airlines like Air India, British Airways, Cathay Pacific, Lufthansa, and Virgin Atlantic suspended services to the Middle East. The world's most connected aviation hub, Dubai International Airport, the busiest in the world, took hits and fell silent. Global stock markets declined, with the Dow Jones falling over 400 points and the S&P 500 dropping 0.7% on 2nd March. And while the Dow fell, some portfolios grew very fast. Defense stocks, Northrop Grumman, Lockheed Martin, surged. That is the grotesque arithmetic of modern war. Someone always profits from the fire. But the average American family filling up their tank, paying their grocery bill, watching their retirement account wobble, they are not the ones profiting. They are the ones absorbing the cost of decisions made in Washington boardrooms and Tel Aviv war cabinets. Now, here is the most fascinating and underreported dimension of this entire crisis, and it is the internal fracture inside Iran itself. Because the story that is being sold, that Iran is a unified, centrally directed war machine, is not the full picture. Despite President Pezeshkian's apology to the neighboring states for the strikes and order to the armed forces to stop the strikes, the Revolutionary Guards continued with the attacks, exposing a leadership rift within the Iranian government. The president of the Islamic Republic went on television, apologized to the Gulf states, ordered the military to stop, and the IRGC kept firing. This is extraordinary. This is a state where the civilian leadership literally cannot control its own military in real time, in wartime, in the middle of the most consequential crisis in the Republic's history. The center of power lies with the office of the Supreme Leader and with the IRGC, even during peacetime. And now, with the Supreme Leader dead and no replacement yet confirmed, the IRGC is operating with the autonomy of a state within a state, answering to its own commanders, its own doctrine, its own conception of Iran's strategic interests. Pezeshkian said on Saturday that Iran's armed forces had sometimes acted at their own discretion during the recent conflict. At their own discretion. Those words, coming from a sitting president during an active war, are the admission of something that every serious analyst of Iran has always known but rarely seen, confirmed this nakedly in public. The IRGC is not an instrument of state policy. It is the state policy. The president is the public face. The IRGC is the fist. And right now, the fist is operating without anyone's hand inside it, guided only by its own deeply embedded institutional will to resist, to strike, to survive. On 8th March, Mojtaba Khamenei was elected to replace his father as supreme leader, and the IRGC, as well as Iran's top leaders, including Mohammad Bagher Ghalibaf, Ali Larijani, and Masoud Pezeshkian, pledged their allegiance to him. Ali Khamenei's own son, a man accused of human rights abuses, rarely seen in public, with no established political career. Suddenly, the new supreme leader of a state at war. Trump called him lightweight and threatened he would not last long. But consider the deeper implications. Iran has managed to execute a succession of supreme leadership in the middle of an active war, with its capital being bombed, with its internet connectivity reduced to almost nothing, with its entire senior military command decimated. That is not the behavior of a collapsing state. That is the behavior of an institution that planned for this exact scenario. Gulf states may question continuing partnerships with the US military in the future, since they have neither acted as a deterrent nor been able to protect from Iranian missile and drone incursions. The perceived lack of US protection for the Gulf states may affect how other allied countries view the rationale for hosting US military assets. This is the sentence that keeps geopolitical strategists awake at night, because the entire architecture of American power in the Gulf, that vast network of bases, alliances, bilateral security agreements, arms sales worth hundreds of billions of dollars, rests on a single foundational promise that the United States can protect you. If you host American forces, if you sign American security agreements, if you allow American aircraft to use your runways, America will keep you safe. Dubai got bombed. Kuwait's airport got struck. Bahrain's water desalination plant took a drone hit. Iran struck the US Fifth Fleet headquarters, Al Udeid Air Base in Qatar, Ali Al Salem Air Base in Kuwait, Al Dhafra Air Base in the UAE, and the US Navy Fifth Fleet headquarters in Bahrain. American bases hit, and the Gulf states, whose territory these bases sit on, got struck alongside them. The security guarantee showed its limits in real time, on live television in front of the entire world. According to an analysis in Reuters, by sending missiles at Gulf states, Iran has caused the Gulf states to realize that Iran poses a threat to them and could thus cause them to support the US-Israel strikes. Former CIA Director David Petraeus echoed these sentiments, stating that Iran's targeting of other Gulf states was likely a strategic error that could pull additional countries into the war. Petraeus may be right tactically, but he is missing the longer game. Because every Gulf leader looking at the wreckage of their airports, their oil infrastructure, their tourism sectors, their stock markets, every single one of them is also quietly asking a deeper question. Was aligning this closely with Washington worth this? And in the chancelleries of Beijing, Moscow, Ankara, Delhi, they are watching very carefully how the Gulf states answer that question in the months ahead. What began as a potentially contained operation has rapidly broadened into a regional crisis with direct implications for global energy supply, freight markets, and commodity pricing. This is no longer a geopolitical risk premium in the abstract. Supply is being disrupted in real time. That sentence from Kepler's analysis deserves to be framed, because for years, analysts and markets priced Middle East risk as something theoretical, something they could hedge against with options and futures and diversified portfolios. What we are watching right now is the moment when the theoretical became physical, when the risk became reality, when the smoke stopped being metaphorical and started rising over actual buildings in actual cities that people actually live and work in. After rising as much as 50% to nearly $120 a barrel before falling, oil prices still remain about 17% higher than they were before the US and Israel launched joint strikes on Iran on February 28th. And the question that determines whether this is a painful but manageable disruption or a civilization-altering catastrophe is whether the Strait of Hormuz stays partially closed or fully, persistently closed. A prolonged conflict with significant disruptions in the Strait of Hormuz could see oil reaching $100 USD per barrel, but in a tail risk scenario in which the Iranian regime targets energy infrastructure in the region and disrupts shipping in the strait, Brent could rise above $130 per barrel. And beyond $130, we are in territory that the global economy has not had to navigate in living memory, territory that would reshape inflation, interest rates, consumer prices, geopolitical alignments, and the domestic political fortunes of every government on Earth, including this one. What you are watching right now from Dubai to Kuwait is not just a military event. It is the violent, fiery dissolution of an old regional order that was built on three assumptions: that American military supremacy could guarantee Gulf security, that the Gulf states could maintain profitable neutrality between Washington and Tehran, and that Iran could be deterred, contained, and ultimately coerced into submission. All three of those assumptions are being stress tested simultaneously in real time, and the results are not reassuring for anyone who built their strategy on those foundations.